Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. This time, we're going back in time a little bit, looking at the history of U.S. radio.
Oh, yeah.
But with a twist.
A twist.
We're not going to just be looking at, like the golden age of radio and all that.
Right.
We're going to be going a little deeper.
Yeah.
And looking at the influence of some conservative and sometimes even reactionary movements on the radio.
Yeah. This is something that I think is really interesting because we often think about early radio as being this unifying force, this kind of like shared national experience and bringing people together.
Everyone's listening to the same shows. Everyone's coming together.
Exactly.
Around the radio.
Yeah, and the reality is just so much more complex than that.
Yeah.
And honestly, a little bit more unsettling in some ways.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, our source material is an academic article.
Okay.
It's called Reactionary Conservatism and Legacies of Struggle in U.S. Radio History.
Wow, what a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a long one.
Okay.
But it's really fascinating stuff. And
I bet.
What we're going to try to unearth here is some of the hidden patterns in U.S. radio, like how radio has been used as a platform. Not just for progressive ideas, which we often think about, like social justice and things like that, but also reactionary ideas, especially during times of like social and political upheaval.
Yeah.
Like the Red Scares and McCarthyism.
Yeah, like think about it this way, like before the big national networks came on the scene.
Okay.
Local radio was almost like the Wild West of media.
Oh,
like
whoa.
Anyone with a transmitter and an opinion could command an audience.
Really?
And some of those opinions were pretty,
I bet.
let's just say they wouldn't really fly in today's world.
Yeah, you can't just say anything you want on the radio anymore.
Not quite.
Yeah.
But
the article mentions some of these figures, like William K. Henderson, who broadcasted out of Shreveport, Louisiana.
Okay.
And Bob Schuller.
Oh, yeah.
Out in Los Angeles.
Okay.
These guys were like promoting fundamentalist views, which were often laced with some pretty blatant racism and xenophobia.
It's kind of hard to imagine turning on the radio today and hearing someone openly advocating for racial segregation.
Yeah.
But that was the reality for many listeners in the early days of radio.
That's wild.
Yeah, and figures like Henderson, they often use this kind of coded language, often cloaked in this religious rhetoric.
Okay.
To kind of subtly promote these really racist ideologies.
Oh, wow. So they weren't like explicitly saying these things. They were kind of...
Well, they weren't always explicit. No, sometimes they were. But a lot of times it was this kind of dog whistle type of language.
Wow, that's crazy.
So, for example, Henderson once warned his listeners about the dangers of mongrelization.
Mongrelization.
Yeah, this was a term that was used by white supremacists to oppose interracial relationships.
Oh, wow.
And unfortunately, this kind of rhetoric really resonated with a segment of the population.
I bet.
And helped fuel the fires of racial prejudice.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about the impact that these figures had.
Right.
Especially given how much people trusted the radio as a source of information.
Absolutely. It was this new medium.
Right.
And people didn't necessarily have the framework yet to understand, how to critically engage with it.
Yeah, and it seems like this is where like the rise of anti-communism really becomes a turning point in both U.S. history and radio history.
Yeah, the Red Scare and McCarthyism cast a long shadow over radio broadcasting.
Right.
And, it wasn't just a matter of politicians pushing an agenda.
Right. The article is arguing that the radio industry itself was deeply complicit in this silencing of dissenting voices.
Think about how pervasive the fear of communism was during the Red Scare.
Yeah.
I mean, it infiltrated every aspect of American life.
Right.
Even something as seemingly innocuous as radio advertisers.
Right.
Fearing association with anyone named controversial.
Oh, yeah.
They put pressure on networks to avoid certain topics and individuals.
I see.
And the consequences were devastating.
Yeah.
The article highlights the case of Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson.
Yeah. Incredibly talented African-American singer and activist.
Okay.
Because he was a vocal critic of racial injustice and American foreign policy.
Okay.
He was labeled a communist.
Wow.
And blacklisted. They even revoked his passport.
What?
Effectively ending his international career.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's a tragic example of how the fear of communism was used to silence those who dared to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And Robeson wasn't alone.
Right.
Billie Holiday.
Oh, wow.
Another iconic figure faced similar persecution for her song Strange Fruit.
Right.
A powerful protest against lynching.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about how these artists were punished for simply speaking truth to power. And this fear wasn't just limited to individuals.
Right.
We also see the chilling effect of the Hollywood 10 blacklist.
Right, for those unfamiliar with this case.
Yeah.
The Hollywood 10 were a group of screenwriters and directors who refused to cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee, HAWC we call it, which was investigating alleged communist influence in the entertainment industry.
Right.
They were held in contempt of Congress.
Oh, wow.
Jailed and blacklisted, effectively ending their careers.
So this climate of fear and suspicion like permeated the entire entertainment industry, and radio was like right at the center of it.
What's important to remember is that this wasn't just a government crackdown. The radio industry itself actively participated in blacklisting and censorship networks, sponsors, even talent agencies.
Wow.
They were all too willing to play along, driven by this fear of being associated with anyone deemed un-American.
So this raises like a crucial question. If the industry was so quick to silence dissenting voices, were there any pockets of resistance? Were there any people or groups who used radio to push back against this tide of fear and conformity?
There were, and that's what makes this history so fascinating, because even in the darkest of times, there were these glimmers of hope.
Oh, wow.
Individuals and organizations who saw radio as a tool for social justice and progressive change.
Okay, so it wasn't all bad.
Not at all.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll talk about some of those glimmers of hope in radio history.
Let's do it.
So we've been talking about this like dark period in radio history with all this silencing of dissenting voices.
Yeah.
But you're saying that there were these bright spots.
Yeah, absolutely.
These people who were fighting back against all of that.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that, the seeds of this resistance, they were actually planted long before the Red Scare.
Really?
Yeah, even in the early days of radio, amidst all the firebrand preachers and conservative commentators, there were these progressive voices advocating for social justice and workers' rights.
So it's almost like there are these two parallel tracks running through radio history.
Precisely.
Like this constant push and pull.
Yeah, a constant struggle.
Between conservative and progressive forces.
It's not just about different viewpoints, though. It's about understanding how radio, as this powerful new medium, was being used to actually shape public opinion and influence the political landscape.
So it wasn't just about entertainment. No. It was about power.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this becomes really clear when we look at the role of labor unions in early radio. The article highlights the emergence of pro-labor stations.
Pro-labor stations?
Yeah.
Like radio stations that were pro-labor?
Yeah, like WCFL in Chicago.
Wow, I never knew something like that even existed back then.
Oh, they were a force to be reckoned with.
Really?
WCFL, for example, was owned and operated by the Chicago Federation of Labor.
Wow.
It was this powerful voice for workers' rights, broadcasting news and commentary from a pro-union perspective.
So in the midst of all this, like, conservative rhetoric, you had this station that was, like, actively challenging the status quo.
Absolutely.
And giving a platform to the labor movement.
Yeah, and they faced a lot of pushback for it, too.
I bet.
Conservative groups and even the National Association of Broadcasters tried to silence them.
Wow.
But WCFL persevered.
Good for them.
They understood the power of radio to reach working-class audiences and mobilize them around issues like fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to organize.
This is such a great example of how radio could be used as a tool for, like, social change.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about broadcasting entertainment.
Right.
It was about empowering communities.
Exactly.
And giving a voice to the voiceless.
And this brings us to another fascinating example of progressive pushback. The Pacifica Foundation.
I've heard of Pacifica Radio, but I don't really know much about its history.
It's a truly remarkable story. Pacifica was founded by Lewis Hill.
Lewis Hill?
A conscientious objector during World War II. Hill was deeply disturbed by the rise of Cold War conformity and the silencing of dissenting voices. And he believed that radio had this potential to be a force for peace and understanding, a platform for open dialogue and the free exchange of ideas.
So he basically created this, like, alternative radio network. Dedicated to challenging the status quo.
Yeah, their flagship station, KPFA in Berkeley, California.
KPFA?
Yeah, really pushed the boundaries. They hosted discussions on controversial topics like U.S. foreign policy, bringing together voices from across the political spectrum. This was unheard of at a time when, even the slightest hint of dissent was met with suspicion and accusations of communist sympathies.
It sounds like they were walking a tightrope.
They were.
Constantly pushing the limits of what was considered acceptable.
Yeah, and they chased constant pressure from conservative groups, government agencies, even the FBI.
Wow.
But they persevered.
Good for them.
And their commitment to open dialogue and diverse perspectives really helped pave the way for a more independent and critical media landscape.
It's amazing to think that this, little station in Berkeley had such a profound impact on the history of radio, and it's still going strong today.
The legacy of Pacifica is a testament to the enduring power of independent media.
Yeah.
And the importance of challenging dominant narratives.
Okay.
Their story also raises some important questions.
Yeah, like what?
About the challenges of maintaining this kind of independence in an increasingly commercialized media environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've seen how radio has been used for both good and bad. How it could be a tool for progress or a weapon for division.
And this brings us back to the present day.
Okay.
As we navigate this complex media landscape of the 21st century, with its own challenges of misinformation and polarization, it's worth asking, what lessons can we learn from the history of radio?
Yeah.
How can we ensure that audio mediums like podcasts are used to promote understanding, empathy, and constructive dialogue?
Those are big questions.
They are.
And ones we'll continue to explore in just a moment. It's wild to think that, all this stuff we've been talking about, goes all the way back to the early days of radio.
It's all connected.
Yeah, from the Wild West of early radio to the, chilling effects of McCarthyism.
Right.
To these inspiring stories of resistance, like WCFL and Pacifica.
Yeah.
It's like radio has always been this battleground for ideas.
Absolutely.
Like a reflection of the social and political currents of its time.
It's a mirror to society in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think as we're grappling with similar challenges today, misinformation, polarization, erosion of trust, it's more important than ever to understand how these patterns repeat themselves, even across different mediums.
It's not just about radio anymore.
Right. So how do we apply these lessons from radio's past to the way we engage with audio mediums today?
Yeah.
Especially podcasts.
Right. Podcasts have become such a dominant force in the way people consume information and entertainment.
It's true. It's like everyone's listening to podcasts now.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that intimacy also comes with a responsibility.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. When you're listening to a podcast, you're often letting someone's voice directly into your ear.
Right.
Into your headspace.
Yeah.
You're allowing them to shape your understanding of the world, to influence your thoughts and beliefs.
It's true.
And that's a powerful thing.
Like you're inviting them into your reading room for a conversation?
Exactly. And just like you'd be discerning about who you invite into your home, we need to be equally discerning about the voices we allow into our ears.
So it's not just about being entertained.
No.
It's about being critical, questioning the information we're receiving. Considering the source.
Exactly. We need to be aware of the potential biases of podcast creators.
Right.
The motivations behind their work.
Yeah.
The sources they're relying on.
And as listeners, we have a responsibility to be active participants in this process.
Absolutely.
To engage with the material critically and seek out diverse perspectives.
This is where the story of Pacifica becomes so relevant.
Oh, yeah.
They demonstrated that even in a media landscape dominated by commercial interests and powerful gatekeepers, there's always room for independent voices, for alternative perspectives, for challenging the status quo.
And that's the beauty of podcasts, right? Yeah. It's a medium that's still relatively accessible, where anyone with a microphone and an internet connection can potentially reach a global audience.
But that accessibility also means that there's a greater need for critical listening.
Right.
For media literacy, for understanding the ways in which audio can be used to both inform and manipulate.
Yeah, this whole deep dive has really made me think about my own listening habits.
Yeah.
About the voices I choose to amplify. And the narratives I allow to shape my understanding of the world.
And that's perhaps the most important takeaway from our exploration today.
Yeah.
Awareness is the first step towards responsible engagement.
Right.
By understanding the history of radio, its potential for both good and bad, we can be more conscious consumers of audio content in all its forms.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into U.S. radio history, I think the question we're left with is this.
Okay.
How can we, as listeners and creators, use this incredible medium to foster understanding, empathy, and constructive dialogue in a world that often feels increasingly divided?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And one that I hope our listeners will continue to explore. Yeah, long after this episode ends.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, this was great.
Through the fascinating and complex world of U.S. radio history.
Absolutely.
We hope it's sparked some new insights and maybe even a bit of healthy skepticism.
Always a good thing.
Yeah, about the narratives we encounter in our daily lives.
For sure.
Keep those ears open, those minds engaged.
Stay curious.
And as always, thanks for listening.
See you next time.